Hi, I'm Dan Pasternak. It is Wednesday, June 24th, 2009, and I'm here in the offices adjacent to the Ed Sullivan Theater here in New York, New York, with Mr. Paul Shaffer. We're going to talk about his career in, well, of course, music, but chiefly his career in television for the Archive of American Television.
And when he pluralizes the word office, you know he's not fooling around.
That's right. All right, we're going to start at the very beginning. What was your name at birth?
Paul Allen Wood Shaffer.
And tell us when and where you were born.
Born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, November 28th, 1949.
And tell us a bit about your family, your mother, your father.
My mother was born and raised in Toronto. Her father, an immigrant from England. Before that, who knows, Middle European origin. And he was a tailor. In other words, my mother's father was a tailor. Sewed my new blue jeans. And I'm very proud of the fact that I have, the schmatter business in my family, on my mother's side.
Good, solid Jewish stock.
He was a custom tailor, and I have early memories, although I was not raised in Toronto, I was raised in Thunder Bay, Ontario, 1,000 miles northwest of Toronto, on the north shore of Lake Superior. And that was where my father's family lived. My father was born there, born and raised there. It was originally known as the Twin Cities of Fort William and Port Arthur, Ontario. But I was saying that I have memories of visiting my mother's family in Toronto at Christmas time and going downtown where my grandfather would be working on a suit and seeing the long rolls of material and getting that feel for the garments, and he was cutting up patterns and stuff like that. I remember that very clearly. I was only a bit, less than 5 years old, but I do remember that. My dad was a lawyer in Thunder Bay. He was born there. His father, he was a second or third generation Thunder Bay resident. In other words, his grandfather, or maybe even great-grandfather, somehow immigrated through Ellis Island here. Went originally, I understand, to New Jersey, then up to Thunder Bay, nobody knows why, Fort William. Came back here, went back there. You know what I mean? The family business was Western Iron and Metal, scrap metal business, and the business of dismantling ships sometimes and cars, making them into scrap metal, selling it probably by the tonnage. And my uncle Sam, who was the only, my dad no longer with us, but and my dad had two brothers, one of which is living, Sam, one of whom is living, and he was the guy who ran the Western Iron and Metal company through my childhood. But my dad went to law school in Toronto and became a lawyer in this town of Thunder Bay. Did all kinds of law, from criminal to accident work to wills. And I remember a lot of that in my childhood as well.
Now, where in your family did the? Oh, I'm sorry. All
You
right,
had-
we've had a brief cut where we've all now gotten beverages.
Now
Care to
introduce
do,
me.
A Shaffer.
You introduced me. Now, Edward G. Robinson from Maxwell House Coffee.
Ladies and gentlemen, now Edward G. Robinson from Maxwell House Coffee.
I've always liked the good things in life. Good art, good book, good coffee. I'm so particular about my coffee, our cook says, make it yourself. So I do. And then he's in the kitchen. Shh. I make it a new revolutionary way. Cold water and instant Maxwell House coffee. Gives you a cup of coffee that's good to the very last drop. Then finally, he's back in front of the roaring fire. Now do it my way, see? You'll like it.
That was fantastic. There's a little bonus comedy we weren't counting on there.
Bonus track.
I was thinking we would get one of your traditional late show toasts with a beverage, because everyone enjoys a fine beverage.
Yeah, I don't do it toast too much.
I always enjoy your toast.
They do them in Las Vegas a lot, and the entertainers in their show.
All right. Well, we were talking about your.
I'll do Wayne Newton's toast, though.
All right.
Speaking of Vegas, do not walk behind me, for I will not lead. Do not walk in front of me, for I will not follow. No. Do not walk behind me, for I will not lead. Do not walk, for I will not follow, but walk beside me and be my friend.
And off camera, we are all drinking along with you.
Yes, I noticed.
All right. So now back to your family.
Yeah.
Curious if any of your comedic or musical early influences came from any of these members of your family.
Well, certainly, and both of my parents, certainly, musically, both were insistent that I grow up with a feeling and an appreciation for music, and so this took the form of both. My mother's making sure that there was always music playing in the house. Her favorite music, which was classical music, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and also her favorite Ethel Merman, and the Ethel Merman Mary Martin at Carnegie Hall. As well as classical recordings, Arthur Rubinstein. Then my dad, jazz fan, loved Oscar Peterson, also Ray Charles, and the great jazz vocalists that also included Billy Eckstine, Billy Daniels. I speak, of course, very fondly of my parents in my book, and talk about how they even took me to Las Vegas one time on a family trip. I was an only child, but they weren't gamblers at all, just to see shows. And we saw Nat Cole in Las Vegas live at the, I can't remember which hotel it was now, but if it was the Desert Inn, then we also saw Harry James in the bar, but I couldn't, as a child of about 12, not allowed into these bars, or even really to walk into the casino. I remember this quite clearly, and hence my fascination with Las Vegas, and what it represented, at least what it used to represent in the world of entertainment, to the world of entertainment. Now it's more of a velvet rope, Paris Hilton, pure kind of thing. But
like old classics.
in the days of the Rat Pack, yeah. But there is my, you know, in a nutshell, my musical influences from both of my parents, also their fascination with show business. And there was nothing like watching the Ed Sullivan Show with them on Sunday nights, because they knew, you know, as Ed Sullivan featured something for everyone in the family, they knew when it came to an old British music hall gal like Tessie O'Shea, you know, they knew exactly who she was, what she was famous for. Whether it be, you know, Al Hibbler and the Duke Ellington band. You know, my dad knew all about this stuff, and not to mention who, you know, who was wearing a toupee and who wasn't. So there you have, you know, my sort of basic grounding in show business and comedy. I think certainly they were, you know, they liked a good laugh as much as anybody. My parents, and otherwise, I don't know. I gravitated towards funny people. I guess because I really, you know, like nothing better than to have a good laugh.
Other than the Sullivan Show, what else can you remember watching on television when you were a kid?
Well, you know, growing up in Canada, it was hockey night in Canada, Saturday night, whether you liked it or not. So I certainly know the CBC coverage of the NHL games, and then for my formative years until I got to about grade 7 or 8, there was only one channel received up there in my hometown of Fort William, later to be renamed Thunder Bay. Just the CBC. So that was the extent of my viewing, and I remember as far back as when the CBC would go off the air from between the hours of 5 and 7 p.m. when people were dining. They just put up a test pattern and come back on at 7.
Really?
Yeah. And the test pattern had, you know, an Indian in a headdress at the top of it. And it was round, old-fashioned test pattern.
Right.
CBC Television Network. I must say that my friends who did the program SCTV really did nail the CBC in parody when they did a whole hour-and-a-half episode in honor of the CBC and the types of shows that they had. My dad was a fan of a lot of these shows. And I remember early CBC shows, very intellectual in their bent, you know, in their orientation. Well, the longest running show that I remember, it may have changed now, but when I was a kid, that was how it billed itself. And the show was called Front Page Challenge. And, well, obviously you wouldn't know it, you know, wouldn't have been known outside of Canada, but it was a show where there was a moderator and 4 panelists, and they guessed well-known headlines from history, maybe Canadian history, you know, V-Day, you know, D-Day, you know, things like that. And then the panelists would guess, and then after, they would then discuss the story with the guest. And on the SCTV show, and then there was always, they parodied the show and the fact that there would then be a celebrity round at the end. The panel would put on blindfolds, like on What's My Line, and a mystery guest. And in this case, they couldn't guess, and the moderator said on the SCTV panel, take off your blindfolds, and they turned around and looked at the guy, and then they said, well, we'll resume the questioning, because they still
didn't know who he was.
No, because there wasn't much of a star system in Canada. You know, when I was a kid, it was our pet Juliet was a very well known. She would be like comparable to Carol Burnett, except with more of an emphasis on she was a singer. But she had a very Canadian variety show, the Juliet Hour, with our pet Juliet. You know, very, very provincial type of stuff. And the CBC was subsidized by the Canadian government, as the BBC in Britain was also. And there were a lot of former BBC guys working in television in Canada, I would come to understand. Then there was a show called Fighting Words with Nathan Cohen, the moderator, and a similar type of thing. And a panel has to guess a famous quotation from history, even drier. And then, again, if that went bad enough, and after they guessed it, they would discuss it. And I would say to my dad, you love anything with zero entertainment value, don't you? But I was really, I was too hard on him because he did really love singing, dancing. He was a singer himself. My mother was a pianist, but once I started playing the piano, as soon as I was 6 and able to read English, that was the time she said that's when to start a kid on piano lessons. But as soon as she got me started, she stopped playing. I'm not sure.
So you started taking piano lessons at age 6?
Age 6, yes.
Now, with this very eclectic mix of music, the classical, the theatrical music, the jazz, what did you gravitate towards?
Well, rock and roll, obviously. And I loved Chopin, too, and Rachmaninoff. But when I started to hear rock and roll, that really did catch my ear. And I found that it was in the late 50s, when I started to become conscious of it, very elemental and simple in its harmonies. Only 3 chords for almost all of it. So once I learned those 3 chords, sort of like a kid would learn on guitar now, I found I could play a lot of songs, and I started developing my ear for music, and was challenged by to try to learn harmonies and how to play songs that I heard on the radio.
Now, who were some of those artists in those songs, those first rock and roll artists that really captured your enthusiasm?
A very important song to me was Gene McDaniel singing 100 Pounds of Clay. Now, this was revolutionary to me because the form, it was the 4th chord. Now, a record that had 4. And the 4 chords of the early R&B, which that was, I think, it was pop R&B, 100 Pounds of Clay. R&B influenced pop. Doo-wop influenced too, because it had the chords of doo-wop. 1, 6, 4, 5. And I've learned more recently that's called ice cream changes. In the group, in the New York scene anyway.
You like the New York doo-wop scene?
Yeah. This was explained to me by my friend Chuck Jackson, who was a well-known recording artist of the 60s, who sang Any Day Now. A big hit, written by Bacharach and David, I think. Anyway, he said sometimes the guys come in, to a session and not really have any music written, but he'd just have a rhythm section, and he'd just say to the guys, it's simple, guys, just ice cream changes, and everybody would know what that meant. C, A minor, F, G.
I've never heard that before. That's kind of
I loved it, when I heard it too. I only heard it sort of recently. You always learn. I'm still reading the books that deal with the same era of the early New York Tin Pan Alley rock and roll days. I study it and restudy it like a rabbi studies the Talmud. Even though I know the material, I still go over it and over it.
And make new discoveries.
And yeah, new discoveries and see things from different angles.
So now, at what point did you start really thinking this was a path that you were going to follow in your life? Did you have bands that you played in?
Yes, I've been gigging all my life. I joined the AFM, Musicians Union, Thunder Bay Local, when I was 15 and started playing in a rock band. But I did not think I was going to go into show business at all, because it seemed too far-fetched. And I was from a very conservative background. And this town was just so far away from any kind of action. It would be very tough. There was no American Idol then. Not that I could sing, but how would I possibly think of getting there wasn't much show business in Thunder Bay unless you count. Certainly there were high school dances to be played at, as I did with my band, and scale for a 3-hour engagement would have been $21, $24 maybe. But I thought that I was not so much that I would go follow in my dad's footsteps and be a lawyer, although I do say that in the book. It makes it a very romantic, but I could have been, but I certainly didn't feel, law, although I enjoyed Perry Mason, watching Perry Mason with my dad, and him commenting on the accuracy of the writing. But I didn't know what, I would be. I just thought, certainly not show business. So I went to University of Toronto and took what they call here in the States liberal arts, I think.
Did you have a major? Or?
Yeah, sociology. Sociology, and I took psychology and philosophy as well. And that's what a kid takes when he doesn't really know what he's going to do with his life. Nowadays, you can take, my wife graduated from NYU and took television production. We didn't have that, and certainly not. The University of Toronto is a wonderful school, but very much, again, in the tradition of a British type of Ivy League school. I think those two terms are mutually, they don't go together, but you know what I mean.
But a proper education.
Kind of proper education, yeah. You're not going to take, and to have taken music. I looked at the music course, but it was very, but although I developed my ear for playing the piano, my sight reading especially, never really got to be what it could have been. It's still an ambition of mine to learn how to sight read. That takes time, putting in time. That I never
you really play
did.
by ear.
I play by ear, and I can read, and I can write and arrange music too. But I just can't sight read very well. In other words, some guys, most professional musicians you'd find in New York, I think, would be able to sit down and just with a piece of music in front of you, really, two stave, treble clef, bass clef, be able to actually play it from sight. And I never could do that. But I had a great teacher when I was a kid. Mrs. Hardy was her name, and she encouraged my ear. And she knew that I, wasn't becoming a great sight reader. She would end up playing the pieces for me and sort of teaching them to me by rote, actually, now that I remember it. And she said, well, you won't, these lessons were standardized under the umbrella of the Royal Conservatory of Music, Toronto. And they would put out books that we used as piano books and the course books, and then they would send examiners out into the hinterlands of Canada to conduct an examination, and there were grades that you could attain within this Royal Conservatory of Music course. And the examiner, grade 1, 2, 3, he would give you the appropriate examination. You play pieces for the examiner. He test your sight reading. He test your ear. And this teacher, Mrs. Hardy, would always say, "Well, you won't get much on the sight reading, but you'll make up for it on the ear training." So she's partly responsible for, certainly, she encouraging my ear. That's unusual, or at least it was then in the discipline of piano teaching. Classical teachers, at least at that time, would discourage kids from playing by ear, because, and in my case, it proved to be true. I guess they said you won't learn how to read well enough if you play by ear. But my teacher, in fact, encouraged it, and I do to this day on the Letterman show. I do operate mainly by ear, and I try to get the band to. Night after night, I try to get the band to do the same. Horns, when you have horns, it's not as easy to get everybody playing by ear.
I was going to say, it's remarkable to lead a full band.
That's why I'm saying, I'm still trying. Each night I try to lead a full band without having everything written out.
Well,
And some nights it's more successful than others.
I would say very successful.
Thanks.
All right, so you get out of University of Toronto. Now what?
It's a key story in my book, but of course, I'll think of this more as a sort of a talk show, as if I'm promoting my book.
Absolutely.
Because
Well, you should.
obviously, what I'm telling you here is all the different. That's exactly what the book is about, except breaking these things down into stories with punchlines. Otherwise, it is, this story of. And this is, as I was saying, a key story in it, which was that when I moved to Toronto to go to the university there, I gave up playing in my rock band. We disbanded. We were the kind of band that didn't take ourselves so seriously as we thought we could become recording artists. We were just a gigging band and a cover band. Playing the hits of the day. Nonetheless, when I moved to Toronto and didn't have that band to play with, I got very, as it turned out, depressed. I didn't realize I was depressed at the time. All I knew was that I was exhausted all the time, sleeping all the time. If I had a 9 o'clock class, I'd come back at 10 and get right back into bed and go to sleep until my next class. And I was just, and sometimes I'd go down into a practice room and play the tunes, the Laura Nyro album, the Eli and the 13th Confession, all the way through, just to keep, just to appreciate her chords and stuff. But really didn't have any outlet to play, and I'm taking sociology and stuff, and I found that college was a very difficult time at least it was for me, because I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. But in second year, actually, the summer between first and second year, I didn't feel like going back to Thunder Bay. Toronto, I felt much more comfortable in Toronto. Much as I loved my mom and dad and saw them quite often, but this particular summer, after going back initially for a couple of weeks, I talked them into, my parents that is, into letting me stay in Toronto for the summer. And the way I did that was I said, I want to take a course in arranging. I don't know how I figured that out, but I really did want to take a course in arranging. And they were the kind of parents that if they heard course, they were okay with that. They understood it, and so I got a job playing in a bar band I was underage. Not really, technically, shouldn't have been working in a place with a liquor license. But I wasn't drinking, I reasoned. So how much trouble could I get into? I never got into any trouble, but I was certainly underage, playing in bars in the Toronto area and taking a once-a-week course in arranging, jazz arranging. And it's a good thing I did, because outside of my piano lessons and the theory that went along with that, this one course in jazz arranging was really the extent of my training in arranging, and it came in handy. That little bit of knowledge that I gained that summer.
So now at this point, are you thinking about pursuing this
Well,
seriously?
During that summer, I came upon a guy. I told the story a lot, but I will tell it again. I was coming back after having stayed out all night. Don't remember what I was doing, but on my way home at about 6 a.m., and there was a guy playing guitar. We had a place called Yorkville, which was like Greenwich Village of Toronto. I'm walking through Yorkville, and a guy is sitting on a stoop of a deli, playing acoustic guitar. But I walked by a couple of steps, and then I heard what he was playing. He was wailing on this thing. Scales and a type of free jazz that I had heard but sure didn't understand, and there he was playing it. And I just did a double take, and I went right back and zeroed in on this guy and met him that night, and I introduced myself and said, I'm really interested in how you do that, and ended up going back to the practice room over at the college, going in there and playing with this guy into the later hours of the morning. And then I went on to play sort of apprentice with this guy as he played live gigs in the Toronto area in the style of a John Coltrane type of Pharoah Sanders spiritually oriented avant-garde jazz of a type that I was very interested in but sure didn't know anything about, and he sort of taught me a little bit about it, taught me enough at least that I could play for him. As I say, I was apprenticing with him, and I continued to play with him as I went back to college for second year. And I noticed that I cheered up. I didn't have to sleep all the time. I had an outlet. I was going out and playing jazz, sometimes during the week, but mostly on the weekends. Playing again cheered me up, and that's when I realized I had to at least give it a try. And I had a meeting with my dad, who as a lawyer would come to Toronto sometimes on business. I remember meeting him in a dining room of the big hotel there, and saying, I got to at least give music a try. Give me 1 year after I graduate. This sounds like it was going into third year. Anyway, he said, his words were, your mother and I thought you'd probably say something like that. And I think that, that he and my mother, a strange duality of wanting me to have more of a straight, if I may, profession, yet secretly thrilled, as any Jewish couple would be, that their kid was going to go into show business. Thrilled, I don't know why. But because they loved performing, they loved music, they loved,
Well, they probably also loved you and saw the joy that this was bringing you, so why not?
Yeah, but they instilled it. They sure did instill it in me. To have a love of music and performing. My dad loved performing too.
Yeah.
He was famous for his Jolson impersonation.
Really?
Yeah, and he used to say, I might have tried show business. He was a pretty good singer. He said, but I grew up during the Depression, and you had to, you couldn't do something so far-fetched. But I guess, I could, or at least try it for a year. So that's what I did. I graduated after 3 years there. You could get a degree as long as you weren't going for a specialist or honors degree, you could get a bachelor's degree after 3 years, and I did graduate. And then just continued to play with this guitarist, whose name was Mike Munoz. And I'm still in touch with this guy. He was an American who was living in Toronto at the time. He's since moved back, and he lives in the New York area. And I still sometimes play with him and make records. He now goes by the name Tucci Munoz. In fact, I produced a real far-out record with him just after the 9/11 tragedy. And it was called Divine Radiance. He is still maybe more of a spiritualist than a musician, this guy. He's more of a guru type of cat. Tucci Munoz. Anyway, he taught me an awful lot during that time about he not only standard jazz and how to play some of the tunes of my dad's era that I really didn't know big enough chords, you know. Well, he started by showing me some of that stuff and then taking me into that Coltrane-esque avant-garde area. I continued to play with him for musical satisfaction and sustenance, and just was gigging around town, playing any kind of casual engagements that I could pick up, weddings, or bar mitzvahs, or topless bars on Yonge Street.
Well, now, take us to what led you to join the Toronto production of Godspell, and tell us kind of what that represented at that point in your life.
Well, the year that I promised my dad I'd take a year, it was starting to come to an end, and I was still loving playing with Tucci Munoz, and you know, primarily, still, I had to, you know, I might have to face facts. I got a weird, just through playing with this band, playing with that band, I went on this weird bus tour of Canadian missile bases in Quebec, in northern Quebec, entertaining the officers and enlisted men working on these missile bases, freezing cold, 50 below, going up there in this bus with a weird variety show put together by some kind of a promoter. You know, I don't know how a thing like that happens, but I got the job playing in the band that was going to accompany a number of these variety performers and also do a set of covers itself. And met a gal, and her name was Avril Chown, Chown, and she was I knew who she was because she had been in the Toronto production of Hair, and I had seen it. I was impressed by the music as well as the nude scene. First time around, you know, it was 1969, I think is when it was playing in Toronto. And she had been in it, and here she was on this weird tour. Well, she was, you know, although this tour was the biggest thing that had ever happened to me, from her point of view, having done Toronto production of Hair, her career had fallen, and she was bitter about it. She was like a dancer in this weird missile-based thing, but said, "I'm going to audition for this show called Godspell. It's coming up from, it's a hit off Broadway in New York, and they're doing a Toronto company." And she asked if I would accompany her, and I was happy to do that because I was doing that a little bit too, while playing in bars and things. Vocal coaching, teach somebody how to play a song and rehearse it with them, and then go and play it for $20, play their audition, and that's what I did for her. Played her audition, and she learned a song from Godspell, from the cast album. So I learned it with her, and we played it, and she got a call back, and also I had a girl that I was seeing at the time also auditioned, and she didn't sing a song from Godspell, but sang, I remember, Dusty Springfield, I Only Want to Be With You. So callbacks on like a Saturday afternoon where all the people that are coming back for their second time, and Stephen Schwartz, the composer of the Godspell music, came to town to conduct the final auditions. He was a guy who, and continues to be, as he has become an Academy Award winning composer of Disney animated things, and Colors of the Wind, I think he wrote, and now he has Wicked running on Broadway now. Gets very much involved in his shows, far beyond just composing the music. Sometimes, directs them. He was doing final casting, and I played his song from Godspell for this girl, and he said immediately, "I want to talk to that piano player." And as I say in my book, if I may plug it again, it was like Lana Turner at Schwab's. He said, "Can you play the rest of the auditions? This piano player doesn't know all the, do you know a lot of songs?" "Yes, I do," as a matter of fact. He doesn't know any songs, so I played the rest of the auditions, and I saw all these people that became my great friends even to this day. Marty Short's audition, Gilda Radner's audition. I remember very clearly Eugene Levy's audition, and we're all friends now.
Talk about your first impressions of these people. I mean, you're talking about amazing confluence of talent there.
Yeah, and I didn't realize it at the time. I thought to myself, boy, if I ever got to New York, that would really be talent. But I didn't realize how unusual that was. And Victor Garber was in the production too, as was later on Dave Thomas, also very funny on SCTV, and Andrea Martin, who I feel is the funniest of all of them, taught them all how to be funny.
Wow.
And I picked up a few things from her too. She was a girl from Maine, somewhere in Maine, but I'm not sure why. She was living in Toronto, and Gilda was from Detroit, or the Detroit area. And she also was just living in Toronto at the time. And all these people, we were all
Were they
around.
all part of Second City at that point?
And this is pre-Second City.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
This came first in the history of Toronto comedy and theater. This was everybody's first professional gig. Marty Short and I were both at the same age, 22. Eugene maybe 23 or 4, and Gilda was also maybe 1 year older than we were, as was Andrea. And it was, in almost every case, our first professional thing. And so I didn't have to go back to school. That's the main thing for me. And I became the conductor of this thing. It was a 4-piece band, and kind of designed so that the drummer really conducted it, or sometimes the piano would set a tempo. But you didn't really have to know anything about conducting, so it was perfect for me because I didn't know anything about conducting. But I gravitated towards these people. And because of how funny they were, and they were also really sweet, sweethearts, all without exception. And we hung out incessantly during this period of time. Most notably at the house that Marty and Eugene rented and shared. Dave Thomas speaks about this house in his book that he wrote about SCTV. 1063 Avenue Road was its address, and we gathered there after many of the shows, and especially on Friday nights. We had a traditional thing that Marty started calling the Friday night services. And our sitter was People magazine, which had just come out at that time. Because it talked about show business and show business people. So that, yeah, very heady time for all of us. Now we were in show business full time, 8 shows a week, and just as much as how funny they were is really how nice they were, and that's why we've all stayed in touch.
Now, how
through
long
all
did that
this.
show run?
It ran a year, or a little over a year, and everybody had year contracts, and so I did it a little bit more than a year and a couple of months. And everybody, well, Victor Garber was the first angelic lead in the show, the angelic Jesus the hippie clown. You know, it was the 70s, very much influenced by Hair, Godspell.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a Hair influence of, it was as if because I saw the revival of Hair recently on Broadway. Very good, very nostalgic, and took me right back to this period.
Mm.
They were hippies in the East Village. Well, what if they got together and put on clown makeup and told the story of our Lord Jesus Christ to 70s Elton John inspired songs by Stephen Schwartz? It might go something like this. That's the premise of Godspell. 10 clowns come together in a playground to tell the story of Jesus Christ.
Of course.
Nonetheless, we all took it very seriously, and it was a very cute show and very nice music by Stephen, with lyrics from straight out of the Bible, Saint Matthew, Gospel according to Saint Matthew. And it was a show with obviously the best of themes, and biblical parables, the telling of parables. It had a lot of freedom for the kids to put in whatever they could do that was funny.
So there was room in there for them to improvise.
There was room in Godspell to improvise, because it was, to diverge and talk about Godspell a little bit. After all, we have 6 hours to kill. But as you know,
We have as long as you want, sir.
Okay. This show, I was like a divinity student or something at Carnegie Mellon University, John Michael Tebelak, and he had this idea for a workshop that they did there. The gospel to rock and roll, and the kids all wrote their own music to it and improvised their own character, their own stuff. If somebody could do Groucho Marx, there was a lot of that kind of humor in it. Doing punchlines as Groucho and things like that. This is what they did. And then when these slick producers seized upon the show and said we could bring it to New York, that's when they brought in Steve Schwartz to rewrite their music. And he kept only one of their songs, a beautiful ballad, By My Side. I remember all of this very clearly. The whole show, I could play the show now if I had to. Because it was so significant to all of us. And if it weren't for it, we used to destroy the kids' knees because they had to jump all the time. The whole set was just pretty much a table, sawhorses and a thing, and they were always jumping up on top of it, jumping down, bang, bang. A lot of them developed knee things. Anyway, other than that, they could all do it now too. Other than if their knees would only hold up. It's all about the knees, that show. So anyway, as these kids in Carnegie Mellon University improvised it, so then they would replicate the shows, and they had 12 companies, I think, running all over the world. They would cast them to sort of people that resembled in physical type and character their original 10 people. They would kind of reproduce the shows in that way. And there were no characters except for Jesus and Judas. The rest of them were just the hippie clowns. And if you couldn't do Groucho, well, what can you do? If somebody could do something else, well, put it in. They enabled each company to put in things. And, well, sometimes this one got out of hand because in the middle There used to be just a little cute nursery rhyme number in the middle as the and entr'acte as the people were coming in for the second act. Well, Marty got a hold of that spot and started doing Sinatra in the middle of Godspell. And finally they came up and, some Stephen or one of his directors came up and saw that. Sorry, you can't do that in the middle of the show. It took it into another, it was brilliant, of course. And he actually did just a piece, the John Biner bit. I think if Sinatra could sing about linoleum and it would sound romantic. He did that in the middle of Godspell. But it was Canada, not everybody had seen it on the Sullivan Show. Some of us had.
So how did this sort of, especially considering you were just sort of getting turned on to this kind of free-form jazz, that sort of, I guess very improvisational, you talk about Coltrane and that kind of stuff. How did what these guys were doing on the stage speak to you and kind of turn you on and maybe spark something in you that you wanted to follow?
Well, I did become interested in the improv thing, but that was because just as this year of the Godspell show was coming to an end, the Second City club people arrived in town. Bernie Solins, who owned it in Chicago, and two performers, writer-performers, Joe Flaherty from Chicago and Brian Doyle Murray from Chicago. Bernie sent them up there to cast a nightclub show and put it on and teach a cast how to do a show in the style of Second City, and they'd have a Canadian branch. And they came to see Godspell and were blown away by some of the kids in that show and hired them. And they were leaving Godspell anyway. So they hired Eugene and they hired Gilda. And Marty didn't do it at that time, but eventually did the show for them. And Dan Aykroyd was not in Godspell, but was a part of this Second City. He and a woman named Valerie Bromfield had a comedy duo that worked late at night at this theater where Gilda used to do, like experimental theater before Godspell started. So all of these, it was a sort of an incestuous, happy family. Not literally, but everyone knew each other. And so I was, these were all my friends too, and although I did not take the job with Second City, with the club, I was offered it, but it would have been a serious reduction in pay from $450 a week to about $200 a week, or $250. Just couldn't do it. Nonetheless, I hung out at the theater quite a bit, their theater, and learned that show pretty well, saw it all the time, saw the improv set. It would be 2 acts of set sketches from the long history of Second City, and then the third set was an improv set in which they would take suggestions from the audience and make it into a show with techniques and things that I too observed from seeing it night after night after night.
So now you were not part of the show. So
I wasn't part of the show.
So what were you then doing at this point?
I was just playing gigs. I was dying to get to New York, and I had been to New York one time. They made a movie of Godspell, and they picked their favorite people from all their different companies, at least the English-speaking ones, or I should say the American ones. And they used Victor Garber from our company So he left the show up there, and I was brought into New York for my first time by Steve Schwartz to play piano on the soundtrack.
So this is what brought you to New York.
For the first time, I didn't move. I just came in for 2 sessions. And he brought me, I was doing Godspell at the time up there, but he brought me in like on a Monday or Sunday and Monday or so, so I wouldn't miss too many shows, to play with various musicians, a lot of his original band from the Promenade Theater that did the first Cast album. I think it was mostly them, because he wanted it to sound pretty, that was his sound. It had a distinctive sound, but he liked the way I played some of the stuff. So my first time was I came in for like a 2-3 day period just to play on this movie soundtrack. And once I really did catch the New York bug. I had to move down, and he said at that time, I'll figure out a way to get you down here. And I believed him. So I didn't want to commit myself to any long-running things in Toronto, and I was just playing gigs here and there, hanging out, and eventually he did. There was a problem, though, because there was a problem with getting a visa to come into the U.S. to work, because you had to have a sponsor, but you couldn't work until you had that visa. Mm-hmm. Now, I also was in the musicians union now in Toronto, and I couldn't transfer into the New York local before I had worked for 6 months, and I couldn't work without whatever it was kind of a catch-22 thing that I can't quite remember now. But so Steve didn't know exactly how he was going to get me in, because he was very much aware of this thing, and it was professional show business, and they had lawyers and dealt with unions, and they didn't want to do anything wrong. But this other show, I would come down and visit during this time. The only people I knew would be the people, the Godspell people, and I would hang out at the Promenade Theater on Upper West Side with them. Saw that show a number of times, Godspell New York. And Brian Doyle Murray, he and I became quite good friends. He moved to New York ahead of me. I would visit him when I would come down here. I would make him go to see this Godspell show. He saw it.
Now, for those
far too many
that don't know Brian Doyle Murray.
Well, Bill Murray's older brother. Right. And he would tell me, we became fast friends in Toronto, and he put together that Second City Club show with Joe Flaherty and all these other friends of mine. He would say, boy, I've got a brother who's in this Second City show in Chicago, Bill Murray. He said, Bill does, you would love him, because he does a thing that's right up your alley, a parody of a sort of an Allen and Rossi style of comedy team. And he would play the Steve Rossi, suave, good-looking singer, who would sing a number, and then his partner would come out, Marty Allen, in a diaper and hair sticking up, but he was Steve Rossi, right. A very suave nightclub singer that I guess eventually became his famous nightclub singer from the early days of Saturday Night Live. And I used to play for him. I ended up playing for him when he would do that, and collaborate on those bits. Anyway, that was the first time I heard about Bill, but Brian and I became friends, and Brian was the first guy I knew outside of the Godspell cast. I knew Brian, and Brian introduced me around when I first moved to New York, introduced me to Belushi specifically. Where was I? Oh yeah, I would come down and hanging out at the theater, and the piano player, Shelley Markham, who was the conductor of Godspell Promenade Theater in New York, said, hey, they're looking for a dance arranger at the Public Theater, a Joe Papp show called More Than You Deserve. And I said, oh, they're trying out guys tomorrow. And so I went. I didn't know how I would work it, but I went and I auditioned for the composer of this show. Again, off-Broadway, experimental. Jim Steinman was this guy's name.
Oh, wow.
And he became well known as the composer of the Meatloaf songbook, Bat Out of Hell, the huge, still one of the biggest selling albums of all time, 1 minute. This show was where he met Meatloaf. More Than You Deserve at the Public Theater. And Steinman liked my playing and hired me as rehearsal pianist, with the proviso that if things went well, I would take over conducting the show after his conductor, Steve Margoshes, left to do the next show by Ratto and Ragney, the hair guy. So I was right in the thick of it now in this public theater thing.